Our third panel will discuss how the pandemic changed our D&I thinking. The panel will be moderated by Ms. Shruti Swaroop, the founder of Embrace Consulting, and the panelists are Yolene Ang with Google, Gustavo Pelaroso Carnero with BASF, Simona Catanescu with Swift, Reina Karajce with IFC, and April Hu with Zegan Fund. Ms. Swaroop, please begin your panel session. Gustavo Pelaroso Carnero with BASF, Simona Catanescu.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. The pandemic has put the spotlight on deep-rooted system inequalities. As the pandemic continues to have wide-reaching impact across the globe, it is important to understand the differentiated and intensified impact the pandemic has on the most marginalized. Globally, the loss in human capital wealth due to gender inequality alone is estimated at $160.2 trillion. Given that gender inequality affects individuals throughout their life, economic costs are measured in terms of human capital wealth. Achieving gender equality and empowering all women and girls is the fifth sustainable development goal and should be top priority for governments and organizations worldwide. We have with us today some leading experts who will share their thoughts on how the pandemic has affected their D&I thinking, the organizations they're associated with, and how we can create inclusive work culture through this disruption. May I please request Yolene to introduce herself as we move forward.
Sure. Thank you, Shruti. Hello, everybody. My name is Yolene Ang. I'm Managing Director for Business Development in Asia APAC. My day job is basically running the teams that do business development for our search, our assistant, our geo products, and various kind of core consumer products that Google has. My other day job, as I like to think of it, and possibly sometimes the more fun job, is I'm very involved in the diversity and inclusion space, and I'm also the executive sponsor for our Asian Googler network within APAC.
Thank you, Yolene. Rana?
Thank you, Shruti. Yes, my name is Rana Karachi. I am with the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. I'm the Regional Industry Director covering the real sector, so range healthcare, manufacturing, agribusiness services across Asia Pacific. I'm based in Singapore, and I've been here for quite a number of years. You know, it's a phenomenal job. And the other thing that I do as well, part of the IFC, is, you know, I am the sponsor or the chairman of the Asia Women's Network, which is a phenomenal team of people and something I truly enjoy doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rana. Gustavo, if you could really introduce yourself. Gustavo?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello?
Okay, looks like we have a technical challenge while Gustavo joins us back. Simona, if you could quickly introduce yourself, please.
Sure, yes. Hello, everyone. So I'm Simona Catanescu. I'm in the Swift strategy team. I'm based in Singapore as my colleague panelist, but I'm having a global role. So the main objective, in fact, what I do is to define and articulate the Swift vision and strategy for capital markets globally.
Thank you so much, Simona. April.
Hi, I'm April Swandahu, and I'm honored to be with this panel here. I'm originally from California, and my formative years in Taiwan. I've worked internationally, and I've been in Asia now for 30 years, here in Singapore now for 11. I've bridged the East, the West, people and technology. I've been blessed with some of the world's most prestigious degrees, Yale Engineering and Stanford MBA. I've raised 4 adult children, 2 girls, 2 boys, and my passion is to close the gaps between the haves and have-nots. Building on a corporate foundation with companies like IBM and Honeywell, I have pivoted to become an entrepreneur, to pursue projects that will really create a planet positive world, which is really needed right now. This pandemic has actually offered me a silver lining. So I have several startups. One is for-profit in the area of green technologies, and the other is not-for-profit of 9x9, which was mentioned by Sanjeev earlier, for gender parity in Asia. And these are all based on years of work in offering scholarships in China. So we've helped 130,000 girls go to school in rural China. So I look forward to contributing more in all these connections of the East and the West, data and action.
Thank you, April. Gustavo, can you hear us? We have Gustavo back here, but Gustavo, can you hear us? Okay, so while that is being figured out, as the pandemic continues to confront companies around the world with a daunting degree of disruption, there's a real risk that D&I will recede or may have already receded as a strategic priority for organizations. While this may be unintentional as companies need to focus on their most pressing needs, it does impact decades of work done. So my first question, given this background that we've been facing, is how has the pandemic impacted you as a leader and the overall leadership of your organization? Yolene, would you like to start?
Sure, happy to. So I think a little bit of the context, about Google as an organization, as many of you know, I think our brand is so much about physically being in the office. Everybody knows about, in almost all of the Google interviews that I used to conduct, when asked, what was people excited about being Google, people would invariably cite the office or the food. And so it was a really interesting moment for us when we pivoted entirely to remote working, because what you do when so much of your culture is built around the office and the food. I think what happened next of the last 1.5 years was really a wonderful discovery for us, which was that really Google is not just about the office and the food. It's about the people, it's about the culture. And I think pertaining to the point on DEI, I will say that in many ways as a leader, because especially my entire team across APAC is remote to me, most of my reports are remote to me, even pre-pandemic. But moving into this pandemic space where everyone was kind of moving online, it made me as a leader really conscious about whether or not I was ensuring that every voice was brought to the table. And I think also what was very interesting in the early days of the pandemic, there were so many anecdotal examples because we are a global company. Asia is often, and all of us are based in Asia, Asia is often kind of on the losing end of the time zone wars. We're invariably the set of people that if you're doing a 3 time zone call, we're going to be the ones doing it at 11 p.m. at night or some heinous hour. And what was really interesting was in the early days of the pandemic, people were like, oh, this is really interesting. Now that we are all online, everybody contributes an equal amount, no matter which region you're in. And everyone was building in practices within the team, to make sure that all voices were heard. So I think that's one point that was interesting. I think also the other thing that I will say about the pandemic and how it's, made us as an organization thoughtful about that shift is, and I think you hear this a lot with pandemics, like in every crisis, there's an opportunity. And I think the opportunity for companies in a crisis such as this one is it's a chance for the company to really show how much it cares and how much it prizes all of its employees. And so I think for Google, that's really what we've tried to lean into, whether it's like simple things like, work from home allowance, people got like an allowance to go buy furniture to work from home, which I personally appreciated, or carer's leave, or even, for example, some of the efforts that we've really stood up in some of the most hard-pressed markets like India and Indonesia, where the office has actually turned into like a vaccination site for people. And so I think, it's been really interesting. The end of this, we're 1.5 years into this, but the statistics have actually shown that people have been even prouder to be part of Google in this pandemic year than before. So our score on like being proud to be part of the company went from 85 to 89%, which is not intuitively what you expect. But I think those two factors are what have stood out for me as a leader at this time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Rana, what are your thoughts on the impact on leaders and leadership?
Yeah, thank you, Shruti. Yeah, being in Asia, I definitely, with our headquarters in the US, fully understand Yolene's situation, and we face that here too. You know, we are a global business, and so we are often in multiple time zones for sure. I think if I were to step back and think about how it's impacted me and the people that I work with in the institution, maybe I can highlight a couple of things. I think one, some positive things, some areas of challenges that have required people to step up as leaders, and then maybe some thinking about, you know, how do we take this forward? You know, on the positive side, you know, the team that I work with, they're spread across Asia, right? We're in 16 different offices. East Asia and South Asia, and we invest in emerging markets. We provide funding to clients. So when the pandemic hit, obviously we were reaching out to many of our clients to see who needed support, or new clients who needed support, because we're trying to help, you know, help companies sustain employment, inclusive, and you know, maintaining, of course, our green agenda as well. And so we had a phenomenal year this year. We reached out to many clients. We were able to support so many clients. The team worked incredibly hard. It was probably one of the best, I would say, years in terms of the volume of investments that we did this year. We did this during the pandemic, when everyone in some shape or form was being affected, right? The number of people that we had didn't necessarily change over the course from one year to the other. So how did we do this? And one of the things, if I were to take a step back, without, you know, the intent was not to talk about sort of what a great year we had, but more to say, how were we able to achieve that in the environment that we were facing, in the circumstances that many people found themselves in? And what I was able to observe was we really came together as a unit, as a team, as a family. And we were able to support each other. For example, we have a fairly sizable team in India, and I think everyone's aware of how India was affected by the pandemic, you know, second and third wave, and really the team was hit hard. Many people affected themselves, immediate family, and others. And what I saw were people stepping in to support each other, to say, look, you're not feeling well, leave it to me, I will step in. Everybody rolled up their sleeves, everybody helped each other. Colleagues in East Asia, where the countries were managing it a little bit better, were stepping in to support. So I saw that. Yeah. And so, and men, women get affected. Women obviously tend to be the primary caregivers for their children. So they were balancing needs for their kids, you know, parents in the home. So seeing people step up was amazing. And I think that really was one of the key elements to allow us to do so well. The challenging side that I saw, right? And again, talking about diversity and inclusion, and different kinds of personalities and different people in the workplace, is that when you're in VCs, yes, everybody contributes. But one of the things I noticed is that the extroverts spoke more and the introverts spoke less. So you started to see that gap widen a bit, right? So what does that mean? As a manager, as a supervisor, as a leader, you really have to be attuned to that. It's not easy. And so, you know, people in the management team came up with very, very interesting and creative solutions to try to keep track of individuals, how they're doing, monitoring them, and coming up with new and innovative ways to stay connected with their team and understand what they are doing, right? We didn't want introverts to feel completely isolated because they're too shy to speak up, right? So trying to find new tools to do that. The communication had to be enhanced. I still think there's a lot more that I can do, but we've tried to do different ways in which we can communicate with staff, different tools, not to overload them with one medium, try to mix it up a little bit, make it interesting, sometimes make it fun, but always, you know, as much as we can, keep them informed and up to date as to what's happening. So that, you know, again, then puts the stress on, okay, how do you perform as a leader? Okay, we saw impacting staff, impacting people. Delivery was still very good. So what is it? What is it that does? And I reflect a lot on this and read up about, and I know many of the earlier panels we were talking about leadership, right? And I took a lot of notes and you know, what they're saying. As a matter of fact, just for full disclosure, I've actually been to the Resilience Institute. So for what it's worth, I'll put in a plug for them because it's an amazing experience. But then it's, you know, what I would call, you know, the a different approach to leadership, right? I call it, you know, more empathetic leadership. I can't remember the phrase that was used in one of the panels earlier, but this empathetic leadership, rather than being transactional leader, being one that looks at sort of the entire team and the benefit of the entire team. We all know statistics show that when you are inclusive, when you look for the betterment of the team as opposed to the betterment of the individual, performance rises, right? But it requires a deliberate shift. And I think what this pandemic has done is it's brought to the fore how important that is. Because if you continue to operate transactionally, you have so many infrastructure gaps right now that'll inhibit you from achieving the success that you normally would have when you have everybody around you. So you really have to pivot your approach to a more empathetic listening, and there's this term that they call servant leadership style. You know, and then one other thing I'll say, and then I'll stop there, is that what is also coming out is people in the workplace really looking for purpose, not just in purpose of what their institution does, right? So I would say IFC has a big purpose. We're all about, you know, development impact, but purpose for themselves because of the challenges in working in this environment. So am I getting purpose here? And I think in my mind that circles back to how are people operating as a leader? Or do staff feel valued? Do they feel they have purpose as part of your team, as part of your institution?
Fantastic. That was nice to hear about purposeful leadership, Rana. We have Gustavo here. Gustavo, nice to see that you're here. Would you like to talk something about how DNI, how pandemic affected the DNI initiatives and what has been the role of leadership?
Yeah, no, thank you. First, I apologize for this bumpy start. I did the test at home, came to office today, but it seems our VPN had something against being a panelist. So look, I think first a little bit about the, so I'm Gustavo, just a short introduction. I'm responsible for agriculture solution business in BSF, which is one out of 11 business units that BSF has, and I'm responsible for the Asia Pacific business. So I think that the pandemic has been extremely hard for every employee. I think first, a very uncertain situation from a demand point of view, transportation. Sometimes customers didn't want to buy our products. Sometimes they want more than what we want. So it's being extremely hard testing, I would say, at the most, the readiness and the resilience of our teams. We have worked very hard across any unit of every company. And also, I think we have not enjoyed ourselves and life as much as we used to be. So I think has been extremely difficult to most of the organizations. And I think also homes have not been set as a workplace, neither for anyone, at least not for me. There is missing space, missing working conditions, and I think especially for women. And we talk a lot about working parents and those who have kids that cannot be at home or without assistance has been extremely hard. So I think what can or could the company do? I think first of all, show strong solidarity and flexibility to all personal needs for every employee. I think that's the best every leader could have done during this period of showing understanding, also showing vulnerability ourselves, demonstrating we are also, as leaders, we are also struggling. We are also with challenges within our work-life balance. And I think flexibility is to adjust not what is always convenient from the company, but also what works best for the employee. And talking about diversity and inclusion, I think it's always about making the people at the best being themselves. And to do that, I think the company should try to accommodate as much as possible to the employee needs. And last but not least, I think communicating and inspiring the team requires a lot of trust more than ever. So I think for me, it was the pandemic situation was a big test of trust. How much do we trust each other in working in projects where we are not seeing each other? So I think for me that have been the key aspects in terms of leadership that we all have been tested. Yeah.
Great. Simona, what are your views on leadership D&I initiatives and how has it impacted?
Well, there is definitely an impact on all of us personally, but also at work, of course. In terms of D&I, as my colleagues here, D&I is very much in our Swift DNA, I would say. We have diversity in our organization. Our workforce reflects the global nature that we have. So, for example, we are more than 100 nationalities globally. And also at the decision-making level, in the last year, we exceeded 30% women leadership at the EXCO level. But I think D&I is, there are several aspects of diversity. And one of them is, of course, to ensure that everyone can bring their authentic self at work. So that's a lot about the inclusion part. And I think the pandemic impacted this inclusion part of the D&I, this inclusion dimension. And I would say that a big word that I see a lot associated with the pandemic is insecurity. So in the pandemic time, I saw a lot of insecurity around me in the company, but also in the private life. It was like a shock in a system that was stable and worked very well. So at that moment, everyone took a step back and reassessed their lives and tried to find their purpose, as Rana said before. For example, in the UK, there was a study that said that 4 out of 10 employees, they are rethinking, their jobs, and they are thinking actually of moving jobs, of changing jobs. So we've seen this transition as well in the company. I think another dimension or a pain point, a challenge that pandemic brought is that lack of satisfaction. Yeah, so working from home stripped away some good things that, boosted our job satisfaction before. And that can be meeting customers, face-to-face meeting, traveling, simply going to work and chatting with your colleagues, having the food treat at Google, as Yolin mentioned. These were the small pleasure of lives that gave a bit of purpose to our work life. So knowing all this, how do we stay engaged? How did we stay motivated? I think a big thing, and Rana mentioned that also, is redefining the purpose of our work. Yeah, if for example, for a salesperson, the purpose was to meet the customer, have a discussion, and bring in the revenue. If that was the purpose before the pandemic, in the last year was more about understanding your customer, supporting him, providing him probably the data that he needs to understand the economic changes and dynamics around him. So that was more of a, we changed kind of the purpose of our job last year. And as a manager, I think we need to reassure the employee that his work is full of purpose, but it manifests in different shapes and forms. And of course, we need to make them feel included and part of the team and be flexible. And as it was mentioned before, ensure that we narrow the gap between, extrovert people and introvert people, or high performance and low performance. These gaps tend to accentuate, to become even bigger in stressful time like pandemic time. So yeah, I will close here, but I think it's a lot about being flexible, accepting that we go through difficult time, and be inclusive of everyone around.
Thank you, Simona. April, what are your thoughts about the changes to leadership and the D&I initiatives? given the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Shruti. Thank you for all the comments from those in the panel and also those preceding. I mean, the pandemic has made enormous changes in all our lives, but there are silver lining. And for me, I want to share, for me, is just much greater self-awareness. And I think this is extremely important. The self-awareness will lead to actually addressing some of the challenges we have. So just for myself, the full stop has really highlighted myself as a bicultural, bilingual, American-born Chinese. As an Asian leader, I sit here with these two natural dual forces, being a Eastern responsible obligation with the roles as a daughter, mother, sister, and to be the harmonious caregiver, versus the Western individual, lean in, vocal, shake. It's okay to shake a bit. And these are forces I think many of us share. And that self-awareness has actually given me the resilience, the strength that Dr. Hansen mentioned earlier on. And this feeling of this need for this self-awareness has actually propelled me to act and co-found 9x9, which is with my dear friend Christine Fellows, who heads the NBC Universal International Networks. 9x9, what is it? It's a research-based, data-driven program to create gender parity framework for working women in Asia by 2030. That's 9 years from now. It's really about creating action and to identify sweet spots to really push what many of us are talking about. And I have to say, frankly, a little bit frustrated. I've been talking about this for decades, I feel. So we've been very fortunate to align with world-class entities like Yale and US, Cadence, a leading market research company, to focus on key market areas in Asia. And they are China, India, Japan, Indonesia, Singapore, and Hong Kong, which happens to cover 50% of the world population. And interestingly, also almost 50%, 40+% of the millennials and Generation Zs, which the UN statistics show that the millennials and Generation Zs will consist of 75% of the entire workforce in 9 years from now. So this is talking about, several of us mentioned about starting earlier conversations. These are earlier conversations to start at a younger, even the Generation Y. So with this research, we're conducting 3,000, and we have just collected 3,000 surveys from these 6 countries of women through their working career from 20s to 50s. And we are now analyzing, we'll be reporting later in October. And the idea is to have a framework that can allow individuals and organizations to create bespoke programs. There is so much research, so much data, a lot of it almost overwhelmingly depressing. So this feels a sense of something positive, something that is forward, and something I believe is for the individual with greater self-awareness to be able to do something about it. And so that's exciting times ahead. I think the pandemic is a reset year, and it's a time that we could actually create some movement to go over a tipping point, and not only in the diversity, inclusion, but also for much more complex problems of our planet right now.
Thank you, April. Love the phrase of reset here. We've, it's so valid. It has been reset for everything, really. Yulin, from your perspective, were there any changes that the organization had to make in terms of the initiatives? I mean, we did hear about how it impacted the leadership, but the various initiatives that you've been doing, the organization has been doing, did you have to modify them? Did you have to relook at the initiatives? Because the barriers are now different. Inclusion has a very different leveling field now.
Yeah. So I think that's such an interesting question. I think obviously in the logistical format, everything had to change. So we've moved from doing, everything in person, seminars, like we used to have this thing called Lunch Ninja, where people would kind of meet in person, get to know each other over, some of the wondrous food offerings that we used to have. But now we have virtual Lunch Ninja, so some of the changes were really small and tactical. But I think two things that really stood out to me over the past year, and kind of the way that we've looked at DEI in the last 1.5 years because of this reset has been quite different. So I think, I've been in Google for about 10 years and involved in the DEI efforts in the company for, almost that length of time. And I think where we started from was a discussion always on diversity and inclusion. And where we are now is a discussion on belonging and feeling like you're belonging. And I'll illustrate the difference in this very simple phrase that some of you may have heard. So diversity is the equivalent of being invited to the party. Inclusion is like you've come to the party and you're asked to go, dance. Belonging is dancing like no one's looking at you just because you can. And for me, I think that has really captured the move that we've made in a lot of our DEI efforts, all the way into kind of from just looking at metrics and things like that, where we do need to do better, all the way to focusing on the individual stories, the specific lived experiences, helping to foster understanding and belonging and being really intentional about it. And I think one of the triggers for this was actually not a very happy set of, events. As many of you know, the, kind of Asian hate incidences in the US sort of exploded as a result of this pandemic and some misperceptions. And really when that trickled down to APAC, it was really interesting how market by market had a very different take on it. So in Australia, where people felt the exact same sort of hate crimes and oppression, it was a very front and center thing. In, for example, Japan and Korea, it spurred a much more inward looking reflection to say, what are the different kinds of lack of inclusion, racism that we experience in our markets in the different ways? And, in the Asian Google Network, where I'm the exec sponsor, that triggered this whole discussion from saying, moving us from this is just a set of events that we're going to run and we're going to talk about what we're doing and we're going to talk about diversity, to a much more frank and vulnerable discussion. I think Gustavo mentioned vulnerability, a much more frank and vulnerable discussion about what everyone's lived experiences were and how could we tailor specific events so that we address not just the diversity, not just the inclusion, but really the sense of feeling and belonging. And I will say again, with this theme of, getting to kind of turning crisis into opportunity, the team in Japan, in the middle of the crisis, in fact, I don't know if you remember Yoshiro Mori, who was the then Olympics chief, making some very unfortunate comments about how women talk too much and hence shouldn't be represented on committees. Our team in Japan, actually in the middle of a crisis, multiple cross-functional teams pulled together and ran a hashtag Search for Change campaign where they raised they elevated really this topic. And, had a YouTube channel, 2.2 million views, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think we've as a company really pivoted to taking a deeper view on what inclusion and belonging really means. That's one. And I think the second thing is I've been really proud of the teams within the company who have, at every turn where this pandemic has thrown up something negative, turned that into something positive.
Great. And I'm so glad you brought up the topic of belonging, because ultimately it's all about that feeling of belongingness that gets a really, truly inclusive culture. For our viewers and audience, there's a survey question that is that you will see on your screen. So please do take some time out and answer the survey question. Rana, coming to you, how do you think inclusion and the inclusion initiatives have taken a hit or have changed during this time frame?
So I know we don't have much time left. I think there's a lot I could say, but let me just focus on a couple of things. I think one, building on what I had mentioned earlier, we realized, so we know institutionally diversity helps enhance performance and corporate results. So I think that there's so many studies on that. And so what I would add is that, kind of building on what Yolene said, is that the inclusion element became important, and it became not just about gender, it became inclusion across the board within the institution. And then you start to identify those who making sure everybody feels a part of it, and everybody works in this virtual environment a little bit differently. Everybody has a little bit of different situations that they're facing. And so I think the inclusion element is not just about, I think that was great, the analogy you said, you're coming in and dancing, right? And so it's not just bringing them in as employees, but making sure that they are part of the team. And so, in this virtual environment, I think, it was not just about where you are from what part of the world or gender, it became the entire team. So in my mind, the inclusion is across the board. And then I think the only other thing I would say is that communication becomes very critical. The mode of communication, the frequency, the transparency, the frankness, and the empathy. And I think at the end of the day, people are still very intelligent, right? So they know if you're not being sincere, or they know if you're, just kind of brushing them off. So I think, how you look at inclusion and the mode of communication and frequency, I think, become even more important. It became more important during the pandemic.
Thank you, Rana. Simona, I also, as Rana said, quickly cognizant of the time as well, but anything you have to add in terms of the inclusion initiatives that were taken by your organization or otherwise?
Yeah, well, when I say inclusion, I always think of, what I thought at the beginning when the whole lockdown came in. I thought, oh, it's difficult for me because I need to handle my kids, 3 children, working in the same time, homeschooling. But then I realized that, people living alone, their experience was different, and I think much difficult, because all of a sudden they were lonely and quiet, and friends and colleagues were far away. So that social dimension disappeared from their life. So that was the first moment, that was the first thing that made me think of, okay, we need to be inclusive. We need to create a work environment that includes everyone. And from that moment, we started to be very flexible. Flexible in terms of, for example, if somebody wants to participate in the video call, only audio. So in the morning, they wouldn't feel like, turning on their video, then we'll be very flexible and say, okay, fine. If you are comfortable only with audio, let's go that way. So that flexibility, acceptance, inclusion was very important for us. And in terms of, achievements, because we are looking for achievements, and we have strong KPIs and revenues like all the companies, like all of us. I think there we also changed our mentality, in the sense that we were more looking at how we do things than what results we bring in. So how empathic we are with everything that happens around. And, also we implemented small things like, everyone can be free on Fridays afternoon, things that helped during the pandemic. And as I mentioned with clients, less focus on revenue and more focus on the business relation and how we could support them during those difficult times. So moving into an advisory role than a client-provider relation. Yeah, great. That was the change in mentality.
Thank you. Gustavo, I'll quickly come to you and kind of, also get one quick line from you in terms of what do you think is the way forward from here?
Yeah, so a couple of things. First, we talk a lot about of work, and we need to be very intentional about how do we want, when we say how we work, when we work, we have to be very intentional in the way we want to consider aspects on diversity and inclusion in this future of work. Maybe a second thing, just sharing one experience we are having. This a very successful, in my view. We are developing the so-called employees resources group, with many different employees being part of D&I programs, not gender only. I think the experience when employees are developing those initiatives for employees has been quite I would say successful for us, and this is something that also we are going to continue to promote. And we initially call women in BSF, now we call women in business. Now we are business in BSF. Maybe that's a couple of quick comments I would share today.
Great. April, any way forward, any thoughts on the way forward as from where we are today?
Yeah, so I have two thoughts. One is that in my own business, I am actually in new technology, in green energy, clean water. And I encourage that to go into new fields and really bring in diverse team, which is what I've done. I brought in members from all backgrounds, all nationalities, all different Israel, Indonesia, South Korea, the States, different ages, different stakeholders along the value chain. And it is amazing. Things do happen. And I think it's that freshness. And I think that's a way forward to solve problems. And the second one is back to coming up with quick wins. And I'm just going to leave a very quick metaphor. Is we all know these beautiful lotus that's all over in Asia. And lotus, there are two ways of growing them. One is you grow them from a seed, which is really hard. You have to crack it, let it grow. Sometimes it takes years. The other very common is from a tuber plant, which is the root, and it grows within months. And my point here is that let's just start with these lotus roots. These are quick ones that are to lean in on existing things, on existing alliances, no more reinventing wheels. And that is what 9x9 is about, is to create some framework and work with BSF, Google. You guys are doing great stuff, and to really come up with something that's useful for individuals, from women ourselves, and from our little units and family, and then top down. Okay, we need a lot to make this change. So those are my two comments: the lotus and green, new technology, new tech for women.
Fantastic. Thank you, April. Rana, any thoughts on the way forward from here?
I think you have to rethink how you lead your team, right? And so, and then, well, okay, we've talked a lot about leadership. So maybe way forward, I would say people have to develop, and they talked about this internal resilience. I think it's important. And at the end of the day, companies can do many things to support staff and to help them, but ultimately you've got to be responsible for your own self and for your own health. I tell that to everybody. I can say, take vacation, but you have to decide you're going to take that vacation, right? So ultimately, I think what's important is, take care of yourself, and the inclusion will come.
Great, thank you. Simona, any last thoughts before I come to you, Yoli?
I think the last thought I have is we need to take things step by step as they come. Nothing can be planned. Very little can be planned, let's say. So we need to be open to change and embrace change as an opportunity.
Great, thank you. Yolene, any thoughts on the way forward from here? I know Mike is here showing us the time, so all yours, Yolene.
Okay, I'll be super quick. So I want to give that answer in part the question that Wendy Wu posted on the comments, which was, what is the biggest barrier you had to cultivate inclusive leadership in your organization? For me, the way forward for DEI is it's got to be seen as a business imperative, not just as a thing that we do in times of crisis, not just a thing that we do just to kind of build culture or bonding or anything. And the way that we do it, I think, ties back to what Rana said, which is all of us have to see this as a business imperative. Whether you're the most senior person in the company or the most junior person, you have a responsibility to shape the organization around you. So my hope is that everybody leaves this call and does just that.
Thank you so much. And to wind it up, inclusion has always been about creating an even playing field for reward and advancement, regardless of the variables. There are different variables that have come into play with the pandemic. So we've heard some of our leading people talk about those variables. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and insights. And let's see how the change variables play out for all of us as the year goes by and the coming years come by. So thank you so much. 2 minutes over time, Mike, over to you.
Thanks very much to our excellent moderator and panelists. We appreciate that. At this time, I will share with you 2 slides with AWLS service offerings. If you want to know more about these service offerings, please click on the appropriate box. While we are sharing this with you, I am going to now move on to our next presentation, which is a success story from Mongolia by Kulangu Amarasana. She is the founder and CEO of Guru Application, discussing her journey as a woman tech entrepreneur in Mongolia. For this part of the program, you need to go to the sessions area by clicking on the sessions icon on the left side of your screen. Once you are in the session, if you want English translation, click on the 3 dots over the speaker's image to mute the speaker. Again, I will repeat these instructions. For this part of the program, you need to go to the sessions area by clicking on the sessions icon on the left side of your screen. And once you are in the session, if you want English translation, click on the 3 dots over the speaker's image to mute the speaker, and therefore you will hear the translator. See you in the session area now.